Welcome to Charlotte Selectboard meeting. I'd like to call it to order for Wednesday, May 1st, 2019. A lot of people, I'm glad to see that. I wish every Selectboard meeting could be this well attended. The purpose of this meeting, the Selectboard felt it was important to have a not regularly scheduled meeting in a timely fashion to receive public input and have discussion on improving the bidding process. I'd like to say a few things before we start taking public input. And these are my observations from the interim of the last Select Board meeting until now. Really, it's an observation on the mechanics of our local democracy here. I really see three functioning mechanisms going on simultaneously from the April 22nd meeting where the contract was approved for the ash tree, first stage of the ash tree removals, and this meeting. During that time, the Free Press, the Charlotte News, has had the opportunity to put together a community sourced article. I hope people had a chance to read it. The Select Board has not been able to do anything according to open meeting laws. We have been, I think, noticeably quiet on Front Porch Forum and in the Charlotte News, and that is an engineered constraint of local government. So we thought it was important to have a meeting as soon as possible once it was clear that the community wanted to communicate with the Select Board and with the municipal government about this issue, and that is the responsiveness to the public's beliefs. So the third mechanism is really, I think, the modern day public square. And all three of these mechanisms have different constraints. Here at the Select Board meetings, we have an agenda. I feel it's really important that we stick to the agenda. And if people are getting off topic, whether they're board members or members of the public, I will kindly remind people that we need to be germane to the issues on the agenda. The Free Press, I think their obligation is to be fair and impartial in reporting. And the public square has almost no constraints except those set out by Front Porch Forum, which is mostly to keep the language appropriate. I think what's important to me in community building at stress points such as this one, where there are differences of opinions and disagreements about process, that in this forum people remain respectful and of people's opinions, and I think can agree to disagree and be respectful about that as well. So I'm going to ask everyone to maintain that perspective tonight. I was going to give a quick synopsis on how the Select Board arrived at the decision that we're at today, and then open up the meeting to public input. So it came to the Select Board's attention from the tree warden that there is an impending calamity that's coming from an invasive species, and the Select Board gave the tree warden the last two town meetings to present the issue and raise awareness within town. The biggest issue as far as the liability to the town itself is really a stitch in time, saving 9 and addressing this issue before the emerald ash borer starts to kill 99.9% of the trees, which increases the expense and exposure to injury and damage to town property if we wait until all the trees are dead on the sides of the roads. So with its foresight, the Select Board last year budgeted $20,000 to be added to the road commissioner's budget to be awarded in an annual contract or on an annual basis with an estimation of needing 3 years to do this work, although we can only budget 1 year at a time legally. And then the tree warden, we also formed a committee, a preparedness committee of volunteers with people with significant experience in the field. Someone who works with the state. We have a former UVM professor who lives in town. The road commissioner is on the committee. An arborist who's the Burlington arborist, Vijay Koma, is on the committee. The tree warden and myself were on that committee. And it became apparent that waiting an extra budget cycle was not going to be preferable. And so I think, if you can correct me on this, Junior, $10,000 was found within the road commissioner's budget. Nope. Thank you for correcting me.
Selectboard's budget.
The select board felt that we could budget $10,000. Thank you. And we'll see where Mary puts that, to do that this cycle and not wait for the $20,000 to become available July 1st. So going from there, an RFP was put together by the committee and by the tree warden. And that was issued on March 12th. And the deadline for submission was April 8th. The bids were opened at a select board meeting on April 8th. Dean went and verified that they were valid submissions, but based on the criteria of the RFP. And at the next select board meeting was the April 22nd select board meeting, where the select board voted 3-1-1 to have the contract awarded. And that is where we are today. So if there's public input, I did want to get a straw poll just to think about how to allot the amount of time for people to speak and budget that appropriately. Can I just get a straw poll of people who are interested in contributing to the public input tonight? Okay, so I think, Dean, people are spread out enough. I'm going to ask that we have the mic passed before you start speaking. If you could speak your name into the mic for the minute taker, Lynn Monty, and also for the record with VCAM. It's not for amplification, so please speak loud enough for people to hear you. Please keep side conversations down, and this is just for amplification or for recording value for VCAM.
Your select board comments, or?
Yeah, I think we'll take public input and go from there. Yes.
Megan Price, I've been a former reporter, I was a legislator. I have concerns about the process and how it's working. And that's why I'm here. I'm actually here about speed, that's my big thing. But if we can get as many people here, May 13th, maybe cupcakes, I don't know, we'll try to come up with something. Try to keep people safe. But in terms of the process, I have concerns. I've just sat through meetings recently, and it's very confusing to me, and I was here when the bid approval happened, and I'm like, what is going on? And it was news to me that there were 5 bids, first of all. As a public member, I'd like to know what all the bids were. I'd like to see a written report that's handed out. It's our money to see who bid, what is their experience, what's going on. It's just like things had happened, and I see the upsetness on Front Porch Forum that people feel it's all done behind the scenes and it happened. And there's so many committees appointed by the board that have no legislative authority, really, but you all trust them, but we don't. I don't know them. I've been here 15 years. Who are these people behind the scenes like the Wizard of Oz, advising you and you just nod and go along at a public meeting? I want to know what's going on. I want to know the process. You appointed a board just at the last meeting, like 10 members on public parking. Good Lord, is there a huge fair coming to town? What is going on with public parking? I mean, a few years ago, we had all this stuff about sidewalks, and I'm watching and going, where's all this coming from? What is this all about? Who are these people? I think the public, part of the frustration for me, and possibly people here, is that you all know what's going on, and I don't think there's things hidden behind the scenes, but it needs to be a more public process. If there's 5 bids, who were they? Not the 2 that were chosen, this is who we like. And to solve today's, if there's really a problem about that, put 2 names in a hat, stir it up, and let a 5th grader choose from another town. Because for $25, this is a good turnout, but I think there's a bigger issue at the core. What is the bidding process? When is it triggered? What's going on with all these committees that somehow have a hold on you, and whatever they say, you approve it? That's a concern for me, that it's not public enough. Thank you for your time.
I'd like to answer some of the questions in your input there. The town has a lot of the information you just asked about publicly available. The purchasing policy is on the town website. Anyone in town can come and request a hard copy of that anytime, and that lays out very clearly the bidding process that the select board is following and has followed. The 5 bidders were laid out in the meeting packet, which was available on the town website and could be requested to the town. The request could be made to the town administrator if you need a hard copy of that before the meeting that night. So that information was available, is available, and it's, I think at the discretion of townspeople to find that information if they want it. But it is there, it is transparent, and that piece of it is open. Peter?
Thanks. On the theme of transparency, a question for you, Matt, and for the board. The agenda indicates executive session likely. There's some pretty specific prescription about under what circumstances the select board under the open meeting law can call an executive session. Can you tell us under what circumstance you're drawing from with that? Because if we have all this stuff and then you guys throw us out and who knows what you're going to talk about, that doesn't feel right to me. And do you really intend to call an executive session when we're done yelling at you?
Thank you. So I'm trying to, I took a screenshot of the statute. So the reason to go into executive session would be here under section 1, subsection F, confidential attorney-client communications made for the purpose of providing legal services to the body. If people in town want the select board to consider the contractual obligation that was made or reconsider in any way, the town has asked general counsel to make an opinion on that, which would require executive session to discuss. So that would be the topic in executive session if the input tonight was asking the select board to consider that.
And that's the only topic, that narrow issue.
Yes. Also, part of the purview of the executive privilege legislation or statute is that no decisions can be made in executive session, and if people wanted to come out or wait until we came out, any decisions that would be made would need to be made back in open meeting. So.
It'd be nice if you waived that, but that's fine. I don't know what you would be huddling with your attorney about that wouldn't be available to the townsfolk.
Peter, what's your last name?
Richardson.
Greg?
Well, I guess it's my posting that started this, so I thought I should say something, sort of. Greg Rinaldo. So I want to talk about the RFP process. The morning after the award my phone started to ring, and people who witnessed the meeting were upset. As a result, I asked Mr. Krasnow and Mr. Block for an explanation through an email. And just a quick note about that, I talked it over with the town manager who had managed towns for 50 years in Vermont, and he said never has a low bid been accepted without a clear explanation from the select board. And I felt I was owed an explanation given the comparison of the two bids, and I was never given one. Bill Fraser Harris, as a citizen, not as the head of recreation, told me he did as well. Asked for an explanation. And after that, a select board member responded by asking for an audit of all the times recreation has hired teachers' tree service and 1 year of recreation minutes. After the thousands of hours that Bill has voluntarily contributed to the community, I found this response disgusting. Rather than a mea culpa or an explanation, a vindictive attack was initiated. And if anyone wants to tell us who that was, feel free. As a courtesy, I'll give you that information now. At the beach, Teachers Tree Service stuck to the $1,000 budget, which is about 11 man-hours, by chipping brush for 34 hours. That's an in-kind donation by Teachers Tree Service of $2,000. The first part looked so good they wanted to expand it, so again we stuck to the town ceiling of $1,000 for more chipping. This time we worked 14 hours of $225 in-kind donation. I've done other work for the other departments in a similar spirit of contribution to the town. The bottom line is Bill and I are trying to do our best for the town, and then we are treated with disrespect rather than appreciation. I bid this contract in the same spirit. That is why my bid was the lowest. It is below my cost. As for the RFP, I've competed in local, state, and federal RFPs, and after the fact considerations are never included in the decision-making process. Chris said he included little trees, and I didn't. Normally, if it is not in the RFP, the response is, so what? I removed hazardous trees from 5 state parks this winter, and I saw a lot of work that needed to be done that wasn't on the RFP. The response was always the same. Thanks for the information. We may consider that for the next RFP. So talk of little trees, firewood, or anything else that isn't on the RFP should not be considered. Additionally, I want to let you know about insurance. My insurance package is 6 figures. There are no family exemptions for workman's comp, and my workman's comp package includes all aspects of tree work, including leaving the ground. Tree care companies are in a unique category because they are in one of the highest risk insurance categories, and if it is a tree contract, only tree care companies should be considered, which is the case in all the state contracts that I bid on. But any RFP, no matter how well written, is only as good as the people deciding it. At this point, I don't trust this select board to implement any RFP accurately or fairly. Carrie's motion before any discussion and then ignoring all recommendations of the discussion indicated a clear bias, not objective consideration, and ignores her fiscal, moral, and professional responsibilities to the citizens and taxpayers of Charlotte. Thank you.
Yes, in the middle.
My name is Margaret Foster, and I've lived here probably 35 to 40 years in a couple of different places. So it's nice to see some old friends. I am the most curious about and I have written an email to each select board member earlier today asking them if they could answer my question, which was, how did you make your decision to vote in favor of the proposal after you had already heard the qualifications of Teachers Tree Service? You must have, all but one of you voted to go with the smaller organization. So I'm curious if each one of you could answer that question. Mr. Tenney did write back to me right away and said, represented himself and explained about the program, about the RFP, and said, I have always looked to small local businesses to fulfill the needs of the town. The difference between the bids amount was minimal. So I got that answer. The small businesses in town get his vote, but I'd like to hear what everyone else thought of when they decided to vote.
I'd just like to say I'm a small local business.
Yeah.
Well,
Greg, let's keep this not a back and forth discussion.
All right.
Thank you. So I saw your post on Front Porch Forum. It was not accurate. The vote was 3 in favor, 1 against, and 1 abstaining. So I just wanted to clarify the record. And the minutes, I think, are also, the draft minutes have not been approved by the select board yet, if people were looking at the draft minutes. We have not had a chance to look at those until the May 13th meeting.
They don't say, no, they don't report that individual board members were explaining their vote. I've read the unapproved minutes, I mean, they're there, but it didn't give any information about how Ms. McCarran or anyone else. Why did you do that?
Well, I did not see your email, and I voted against the motion at the time. And for the reasons of, I took the tree warden and VJ Komai's recommendations under consideration.
Others? Are any of you going to answer? Anyone else?
I'm going to hand out my letter.
Well,
Or-
I'd like to continue receiving input. If people don't want to answer that,
I would
think
give you that
can reserve
afterwards.
the right to.
I'll give it to you after.
And Ms. McCarran?
I'm sorry, I didn't see your email till very late. Here's my statement. This decision is very unpopular to many people. The bid from Fortin and teachers were not identical, but comparable. There was no information that Mr. Fortin could not or was unable to accomplish the tree removal. The fact that Fortin was a local business swayed my vote.
Mark.
Well, I want to start out by just reiterating that Teachers Tree Service is a local business. And it's a local business that's done a lot of, basically donated a lot of work to the town. And I think that should be recognized and acknowledged. And I'm sorry that wasn't given weight by the select board. So I was at the middle of this this thing, and so I wanted to offer some reflections on my thoughts about it. To date, I've talked to Carrie, and I've been communicating with the select board privately about this issue, and I just want to share some of my thoughts about what happened and what we should do moving forward. I wasn't happy with the decision, and I think maybe unnecessary to explain why. That's, I think, pretty. I think that the reasons why we were favoring, VJ and I and Matt were favoring teachers over Chris's lawn care should be, I think, clear to everybody now. I think the larger issue for me is how decisions are made by the select board, and what we can do moving forward to do things better. And the first suggestion I had to the select board was that reasons for selecting any given contractor be made explicit. So especially in cases where the apparent front runner is not chosen. I think the people in, in town and the contractors who participate in our processes deserve the right to know why one contractor is selected over another contractor. The other suggestion I had was that rather than start a contract review with a motion for one contractor, why not start with a discussion among the select board members about the respective proposals that have been submitted. And then maybe if it's not clear who the front runner is, have a straw poll among the select board members and see what the flavor of the opinion is about it. At that point, maybe if there's still not a clear front runner, then do what a lot of people who review contracts do in business and the not-for-profit sector, which is to use a ranking system or a rating system. So have agreed criteria. What are the criteria for the selection of a contractor? And then how do the respective contractors rate based on those criteria? And the criteria are things like price. Who's got the better price? Who's likely to do the better quality work? Who has the most relevant business track record? Who's got the better quality recommendations? Things like that. And then look at the ratings that are given, and that provides some objective basis for decision making, and it's transparent. So that's another suggestion. And then finally, I think there should be some clear rules about, or some, I know there are rules about recusal, but I think the rules should be applied evenly. So if a rule is that you can't vote for a contract if you use that contractor, then that rule should apply to everybody, or maybe it should apply to nobody. It's a small town. It's hard for us to, for the select board members to, to not have had interactions with the people who are submitting proposals to the town. So I'm not really sure about that. So anyway, and I'm available. I know there are a lot of questions about it, and I'm available to answer questions if everybody has them.
I'd like to respond to those comments. I've heard a resonation of your ideas from a lot of people in the community, and I have committed as the one thing the chair of the select board gets to do is to set the agenda. So I've carved out time in the next and future agendas and received support from select board members to spend time improving the bidding process and to work at looking at how we can do that. I really like the explanation idea, and I think we just have to figure out how to codify it to make it universal to all bidders and not just in consideration of a low bidder or maybe an explanation to a local bidder who didn't get it. I think we should just come up with a universal system of explaining the awarding of contracts in town. But that's something that will be, I think, picking up at the next meeting and future meetings of how to do that, and would love continued input and participation there. Speaking to the motion issue, that's also come up about the structure of how the town legislates. And currently, the procedure is that a motion, Robert's Rules has a motion made, a second, and then discussion is allowed. It doesn't have to be that way. And in the past, when I first came on the board, the procedure was bifurcating basically two different issues in the agenda, and they were pigeonholed. So one would be public input, for example, this one, public input and discussion on improving bidding process. It would say discussion only. Voting would not be allowed. So people in town could look at an upcoming agenda and see if there was an imminent issue that would be at a decision point or not, based upon whether it would be discussion only or vote likely was the other parentheses. And that seemed like an unnecessary constraint, and the board stopped doing that. But I think finding a way to be able to discuss issues before an immediate motion that sets a given path in a given direction. It's not impossible to vote down or to not receive enough votes for a motion, but in a sense of having a community-based discussion, it seems like having an open-ended discussion might be a better start to issues, especially contractual ones. And so we'll be looking at, I think one of the work items will be looking at amending the rules and procedures to take away the edge of that process. And the other, which I received a lot of valuable input with people with a lot of experience, is embedding an RFP metric for the decision making in the RFP. One, so that it's clear to the bidders and the select board at the time of the bidding. And so that expectation's clear when it comes time to awarding. And so I think that's a valuable thing to add to all town RFPs and contracts. And, you know, in the scheme of things, this is a $10,000 contract, and we're expecting $70,000 at least for this one issue that the town is facing, which is the removal of ash trees in the right-of-way. But the town enters into hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of contracts, and I think seeing this issue arise at this relatively small contract is a important warning that we need to have a better process for RFPs throughout the town's contract awards. So I thank you for your comments, and I've heard them from other people.
I'd like to clarify this, my reason for abstaining. It's not that I have worked with Greg before, it's that at the time, Greg is currently working for me on my farm, as he still is, and I expect to see his crew there in the morning. Having previously been accused of having a conflict of interest because I had the potential to drive a new fire truck and I shouldn't be voting on the budget for that, I'm a little bit sensitive to proceeding with appearances, which is, I believe, the fourth bullet point of our conflict of interest policy. The fact that someone is working for me and I'm voting to approve his contract for another issue could propose
A perceived
conflict of interest. The procedure that we have to handle that is that it is discussed by the board. At the April 22nd meeting, I was not expecting to have a discussion, so I wasn't really ready, or I would have mentioned ahead of time that I may have a conflict of interest. So I guess if we're following our policy, I need to mention that right now because this seems to be a topic of discussion at our select board meeting. And I don't know if we want to discuss whether I should continue to abstain or that's up to the board members to determine.
Well, I think it's appropriate that you bring it up. We could address it now. My opinion is we are not making any decisions tonight, and I don't see any reason for you to recuse yourself from this public input and discussion.
Okay.
And I think that.
That's the way it's supposed to work. Someone's supposed to mention that they have a conflict. The board is supposed to have the opportunity to discuss and opine as to whether I or whoever should abstain or recuse themselves.
Thank you. Yes, with a blue shirt. Gerald, could you? Yes.
Hi, my name is Peter Nobes. I live on Spear Street. I'm all in support of, Matt, your statement just a minute ago about amending policies. But I have the 6 or 7 pages of the purchasing policy in my hand. I just downloaded it from the web. And there's a lot of meat here. It was a policy from 2015, amended just in 2017. My question is a two-parter, and it has to do with criteria for bid selection, which is A through H. I'm not going to go through every criteria, but there's a lot there that if you were just to follow it, provides sort of a pathway for determining this bid and others, it would seem to me. My real question has to do with bid files. Page 4 of the policy says, files should include a copy of the request for proposal, the date and copies of bid ads, the list of bidders and bid received, and the bid comparison or analysis, and any recommendations made to the select board, copies of correspondence with bidders, and the agreement and any other contract documents executed after award of the bid. Is that file, in fact, followed on a routine basis, and is that public information?
It's definitely public information. All of those, to the best of my knowledge, have been prepared and are available. Do they sit in a manila folder somewhere? I'm not positive, but I have seen each of those documents.
Well, I'll just thank you for that. My very last question about the policy and procedure is under Section 10, monitoring. It says that quality control is important. We all, I think, would agree on that. But it says that the Select Board will periodically conduct independent reviews of procurements and contracting activities. I assume in this instance it's going down to Lake Road and taking a look around periodically to determine whether policies and procedures are being followed as intended. Well, my question is, what if they're not? Thanks.
You mean if a contract isn't being upheld?
If you monitor a project and find that it's come short in one way or the other, what next? You've awarded the contract, but it's obviously failed some test.
I think a number of the contracts that I have administered, the remedy is generally in payment. Payment is not given until the work is accepted. On bigger projects, I recommend a retention that everything has to be completely finished and working before the last 10% of a contract is given, which is usually the profit.
Perhaps that was the policy I didn't do my homework on.
Well, I don't know if that's part of the policy. I'd have to say that's probably part of the actual contract writing.
Okay.
Is there other input, discussion on improving the bidding process? Jenny, Cole, and then Junior, did you have anything?
First of all, I know how hard it is to put together projects and create a request for proposals and receive proposals and make a decision. And it's a clumsy process. A lot of times it's difficult, and you're trying to determine who can do the best work. A lot of times people are your neighbors. It's not easy. I just had a couple of very specific things related to the tree cutting. It seemed that having a tree service or arborist became really important in the decision, but I don't think it was in the request for proposals. Initially, it seemed like people were trying to find a good way to do this at a low cost, and it was more open to other people who had different experiences. And Chris's Lawn Care and Mini Excavating, they have a wide range of experiences and have done land clearing, I'm sure, and all sorts of things, wood cutting. But I wonder if in the future, if the Select Board should consider requiring that it be professional tree service, and maybe setting some other limitations. I think the other question was, I wasn't clear in looking at the request for proposals what was to be done with the wood that was cut. There was talk about leaving it by the roadside, removing it.
that didn't seem to be clear, and I think maybe people were going to handle that in different ways. And same with the wood chips. That's not that huge an issue. There seemed to be a question about marking the trees for cutting, and it sounded like Chris Fortin was helping to mark the trees for cutting. And I'm not sure that's correct, but it seemed like that was what was being said. And so you start to get some of the potential bidders involved with the process before you're requesting the bids. And I think sometimes it's necessary to get the expert advice, but also it can make it complicated when it comes to making a decision. And I know Greg Rinaldo and his work, he's worked at the Charlotte Park and Wildlife Refuge. I'm on the Park Oversight Committee, and he does great work. And there are a lot of really good contractors in town, and they're very giving people. We have people who give extra time and do more than you'd expect of them, and help us all stay within our budgets. So, I mean, that's something that happens with many different contractors. Okay, and I guess that's just about it.
Thank you. Actually, Junior.
I actually had a thought. One of my biggest concerns is, it goes along with Jenny's first question, is that if being an arborist becomes the criteria for cutting trees on the roadside, I think that's going to have an enormous effect on our budget, because Junior does it every year for a couple of weeks. He rents a chipper and goes up and down and cuts trees. Now he would no longer be able to do that. We'd have to hire an arborist or a company with an arborist license to do that work.
Junior?
Junior Lewis, I'm road commissioner. Most everybody probably knows me, and I was on the committee of the EAB with Mark and them, and we had a lot of meetings on it, and my opinion is kind of different than almost everybody else in here. But anyway, to start with, you know, we'll talk about the wood, you know, where the wood's going to go. Originally it said it was going to be left side of the road so people could pick it up, okay? But we were thinking that we wanted somebody interested in it that would take the wood. And I think even Mark, our tree warden, said that at the April 22nd meeting. So that's what Chris was doing. Now, let's just say that Greg got it, I think he was going to leave the wood side of the road. So if the wood is left side of the road, then the town residents can pick it up, which is great. But the key is the stuff that they did not pick up was going to be up to the road commissioner to pick up. Well, for that $25, we probably wouldn't have been able to pick it up. So that's just, you know, one point. And then as far as what happened on the 22nd, it actually started on, I think it was the April 8th meeting when the bids were actually opened, and there was some talk then. And so it didn't start 51 minutes into the 22nd. And in my opinion, I mean, I'm not for either one, okay? I don't really know Greg. I met him once just about 2 weeks ago. We were cutting on Greenbush Road, and he was just pulling out of a driveway. So I talked with him, and I even told him that I was pretty sure that he was going to get the job just because of, you know, that he was the lowest and he is an arborist. But it did not request that they had to be an arborist to do the job. And Mark and I talked, and I told Mark the same thing, that I think Greg was going to get it. So, but then at the meeting on the 22nd, Chris was here, Greg was not. I think if Greg was here with Mark, the outcome would have been different. And another point is, Mark was here. He actually asked the select board, so you're going to award it to Chris. And Matt said yes. in my opinion, I think that would have been the time that Mark should have got up and said, does the board want to rethink their decision? But once you guys made the decision, I think you need to give it to Chris. I mean, it's not that I'm for Chris, it's just like if you start rescinding and taking it away from somebody once you've done it, I think it's going to snowball on you in the future. It's basically $25. Would Greg have done a better job? I'm going to say what everybody else is going to say. There's probably no doubt. You know what I mean? And he was going to do it quicker. But the fastest is not always the best. I know as far as getting paver contracts in here for $235,000. We have a small company that comes in, DNF Paving, and they're a small company. It takes them longer than Pike, but when they come to town, we don't have any complaints. They clean up their mess. They don't leave asphalt on the side, where the bigger companies just want to come in and they want to come in and get it done and get out of there. So, and then, I mean, you know, I just pulled this out of a local Charlotte News, Chris's Lawn Care. And on it, one of the things it says is complete tree and stump removal. So it's not like he just does lawn care, okay? He does do tree removal. He doesn't do it every day like Greg does, but he does do that. And we didn't request at the thing that they had to be an arborist. Now, this was just a trial, a learning experience for all of us on the board because we'd never done it before. But I'll pretty much guarantee you that next year, when it goes out to bid, it will say that they need to be an arborist to do it. So I just think, you know, and there's quite a few other things. The people, I mean, I don't get on the computer. I've never been on a computer in my life. But all these people, my wife printed out, you know, all of these papers so I could read them. And I just wish before people started to say things that they had all the facts straight. I mean, like, let's see, no road closed signs. Chris came to me and said, do you have any road closed signs that we could borrow? And I said, yes, we do. So he borrowed two. They're probably 3.5 feet long by 2 feet high. So he had 2 signs up. You know, it's all these little things, and people just jump to conclusions because really Greg started it when he said the 51 minutes in, and that's really not where it started. It started the meeting before when the select board actually opened the 5 bids. That's when it started. So when you say to go look there, it is a little hard to, then it looks like it was automatically for Chris. Like I say, I'm not for either one. It's just, I think that Chris was awarded. And then the other thing is I mean, I see the sign go up and he's gonna do the work on a Sunday. Wow, you know, I mean, the road is gonna be closed. He's not, by doing it on a Sunday, he's not gonna, excuse me, he's not gonna bother the school buses or the mail because he's doing this work on a Sunday on that closed session. I mean, most of us wouldn't do it on a Sunday. Anyway, that's about all I want to say. I got a lot more, but I don't really want to say it.
Thanks, Junior. I think right in the middle with a black t-shirt.
That's me. Hi, my name is Anik. I've lived here for 20 years. I did admittedly only watch a couple minutes, but my biggest concern here is that you all made the choice for Chris's Lawn Care, and that's the choice you made. But the town tree warden essentially said that Greg was the most qualified, and I'm going to assume that none of you are tree removers or arborists, or, you know, that you are good at what you do, but you are not the experts. And my biggest concern here is that you did have an expert opinion. You guys did have someone saying, I know what's going on. This is the guy you should be choosing, because he comes highly recommended to me, also by my predecessor. That is something that I find really concerning, is that you guys had a really good opinion and a really good recommendation. And that from an outsider's perspective, admittedly, you guys were like, okay, cool, that's enough. We don't have to follow that. And I didn't like that. And I think as someone who's, you know, young and not as politically engaged as I maybe should be here, it was sort of also eye-opening for me to sort of, what happened? To just sort of see that advice be ignored. I wasn't fond of that. Anyway, that's all.
Thank you for your comment. You know, I had to go back and rewatch it a few times, and one of the things I did notice is that with the tree warden's recommendation was also an explanation that he would be happy with either bidder, but that he leaned towards teachers. So it really wasn't a black and white recommendation from the expert on that given night. I just wanted to make sure everyone has a chance to speak once, but I think we have time to come back around. In the back with the blue shirt.
Hi, I'm Susan Bicksmith. Really loud because I'm right here? No, okay. And I don't know either of the applicants for this, but I did watch the VCAM from April 22nd. And I have to say it was eye-opening, and the reason I'm here is because I thought, is that how it gets done? You just have to show up, and then the select board member says, well, so-and-so and his wife are here in the audience right now, and they're part of the community, so I think we should give it to them. And I said, whoa, that's how it happens. So I thought I needed to get more involved and see if that's really how it happens. It was disconcerting hearing what Mark Dillenbeck said and what other recommendations were. I thought, I wonder if the other guy is in the audience too. He must not be in the audience. Do you have to be in the audience to get the proposal? Is that important? Yep. I don't know if it is. You know, so are there questions that come up and so you should be there? Did the other guy not know you were supposed to be there to get the questions? Or do you just have to be kind of a pal of one of the select board members? That's what it seemed like. That's it for me.
Thank you. Up front here.
Hi, my name is Virginia Kaiser. I would just like to speak to having people give you advice. I was once asked to do something, and I did it with Gretchen Morse, who was head of the United Way, who, if ever there was an expert about charities and giving, she is. And we worked quite hard to find out about policy around town, made a report to the select board, and this is like 15 years ago, so none of you are to blame, and they ignored it. They would like, thank you very much, and they ignored it. So if you have a committee who you put together and they give you expert advice, I agree with this young lady, you should take it.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm Tina Flood. I think the issue that I'm hearing here tonight is that transparency is missing, and that the nature of your deliberations need to be more inclusive and more transparent. And that I did watch the video, I didn't watch the whole thing, but it seemed that the decision was made without any support for your votes. And I think that would have been very helpful if you had the discussion, each member contributed what they thought the reason for them making that decision was, and it would have been much more helpful to the public to be supportive of what you're doing. I think the suggestions that Mark made about coming up with RFPs and the details that are included, and maybe a voting criteria so that you know that there's a very clear-cut description of why you're voting the way you are, would also be helpful. So I think this may be contentious tonight, but I think it will be helpful for the future.
Thank you, Tina. Robert?
One thing I like to say is that I disagree with the tree cutting process, period. I don't think it needed to be done. But I will go on to say that the whole bid process and how it's been handled in the past, and I don't mean just on the trees, this is $25. But if you come to any type of meetings here at different times, or you go to town meeting, what happens at town meeting or leading up to town meeting, when it finally turns into fruition on this end by the legislative leaders, isn't always what transpired at the time of the vote at any time. There's stuff added to it or there's stuff that's deleted from it. And you can go back and look at numerous bid projects that we've had that came in that didn't follow the town policy. And I think the bid process needs to have more review by the legislative body, and not, I don't care if the local people or the volunteers do, but it definitely has to have time where the legislative people have time to look at the RFPs, because that's where a lot of your problems lie when something isn't quite right.
Thank you. One more. And
excuse me. Good evening. My name is Tom Nola. I've lived in Charlotte for 28 years. And in listening to the input, I understand that there are rules, statutes, laws that have to be followed. But as I'm sitting here, I'm beginning to think to myself, what has happened to the simplicity of this process and what should happen? And from what I've heard, clearly, teachers' service, tree cutting service, should be awarded simply because it makes the most and the greatest sense to me. They have the most experience. It's what they professionally do. They don't cut grass or plant bushes. They just cut trees. And I don't understand why they were not awarded the contract. At times, all of us make mistakes. I understand that. We all make them. Some of them are worse than others. But herein is a case, I think, where a mistake was made. And my concern is, regardless of the rules and the statutes and the laws and the regulations, where is the strength of character and purpose to try to rescind what I personally believe is egregious error in terms of awarding a contract to what I think is a company that is the least experienced? I don't understand. It's like any one of us looking to have work done. Would we choose the cheapest? I don't know. Maybe we would if they had a reputable reputation. But in most cases, those companies that are awarded the most amount of contracts have the greatest amount of experience. I just don't get it. And all of you are entrusted to make sound financial decisions for the residents of the entire town. And I don't see that decision, this decision, as being in line with that way of thinking. Thank you.
Thank you. I think to the point of rescinding, which came up a lot in Front Porch Forum, one of the things that the Select Board has to consider is what's in the best interest of the town. The 7 o'clock item of contractual obligation of the town was kind of my anticipation of the community asking us to consider rescinding this. That vote authorized the town to enter into a contract. That contract is currently in force, and we have asked for a legal opinion from general counsel. So now what the Select Board would now have to consider is, given where we are today, not where we were on April 22nd, what is in the best financial interest of the town, given where we are contractually. And yes, it was a mistake. It was a $25 difference as far as financial accountability and responsibility, your point to that. And the Select Board voted on April 22nd. I think we're clearly committed to improving the process moving forward. Starting July 1, there'll be $20,000 to award to the same purpose, and the RFP will look very different. I can almost guarantee that the criteria for awarding that bid, that contract will look different than the April 22nd process. I'm very confident of that. So as far as the learning curve and the commitment to the responsibility to the townspeople, to your point, I feel like the Select Board's doing a good job at being responsible there. Is there more input?
Well, Dean, would you hand out my response to all of this? I'm sorry for upsetting everyone, but this is be the best way for me to explain where my thoughts were that night, or for the 2 meetings. It didn't start on the 22nd. We talked about it on April 8th. It's 2 meetings that we did.
Could you use the microphone?
I'm sorry, I have...
The microphone doesn't amplify. It's just for the picking it up on television. I guess I will, if
I've got one more.
well, could I just, as this is being passed out, Carrie came to me before the meeting and asked to distribute this, and I asked that she wait until after the meeting and do it upon request. So I'm hoping this isn't a distraction to the...
This should be read aloud. I'm sorry. I'm not going to accept being handed the homework. I want this read aloud.
Okay, very good. Yes, I did.
You should read it.
I will be glad to.
Thank you.
So these are my comments. I just can't speak very loud.
If we could all keep side conversations down. There's no amplification.
No.
So the way I will just explain it and use it as notes. So this was my own, my comments regarding this. We know that we elect 5 people to administer the town's business, and we make executive decisions covering a broad range of matters. It's a lot of different matters other than trees. We have a select board presently that I feel we work very well together. We are transparent in style. None of us really do engage in any backroom discussion on agenda items. We never have. We like to hear each other's thoughts on all issues, and we use it in a public to make our decisions. And we always really do appreciate everyone that does speak to us. I say I appreciate, I should say, I apologize. I appreciate. So from my understanding, we're to put a motion on the table, which is what I did that night so that we could start discussion. I thought that is what we voted in that night. Or at the first night, we all became a board together. So at that point, I did ask for a motion for Chris's lawn care, and it did get seconded. I didn't have an idea if it would get seconded. It was just sort of to get discussion on the table. Frank seconded. We discussed it because it was our second meeting that we had. We had already talked about it some at the previous April 8th meeting. I voted yay together with Frank and Louise, and we made the award to the contract to the Fortons. We know that Matt and Fritz, how they voted in deciding which contract bid to accept in the case of any sealed bid opening. The select board may choose any of them or none of them, and I knew that. Let's see, so I'd like to go to 4. The ash tree removal contract was preceded by an RFP drafted by the Select Board's Administrator, Dean Block, to which 5 companies responded in a sealed bid. There was a $22,000 750 bid by Barrett's Tree Service. Vermont Arborists were $19,500. Gregory Smith Arborist was $12,400. Fortin's Landscaping was $10,000, and Teachers was $9,975. The RFP did not say that you had to have any particular academic or arborist credentials. You didn't, at that time, we didn't have to. I believe that it did not include these requirements because the scope of work was limited to just those trees. I have no personal relationship with either of them. I am generally really aware that Chris and his family are lifetime residents here, and they work very hard. I know that. I just know. They've raised the family there on Lake Road. The trees are on Lake Road. I just felt that the Fortins were good enough to put a motion on the table for discussion, and we could have, and we'd take it from there. So, and I believe that the Fortins have a very strong work ethic, such as I'm sure that you do as well, and all of these folks that bid. And after I looked at both the VCAM videos, I did not see any activity recorded that was outside what I thought was the standard operating procedure of the way we've done it for the last many years. And also I want to say, Mark, you truly did say that either company would be all right with you. At some point in time, you eventually went to Teachers and said that why, but you clearly said a few times the Fortins or Greg would be just fine to work with. So I didn't do this for any other reason than for what I thought was, in my opinion, the best, a good choice for Charlotte. I don't know, I went down on Sunday after Chris cut down some trees, and it was done very well, and I expect the rest of the work would be done as well. And we are learning, there's a lot to learn about this. It's trees, as we know. In Charlotte, we're all very passionate about our trees. We have been for years and years. And I have been around tree cutting my entire life. My husband is a tree cutter. I've been around it. So I just felt like Chris was capable of doing that particular job. Thank you.
Yes.
So I'm just trying to figure out the criteria that Kara used, and it's, from what I can see, it's that he lived on the street where the trees were, that he's a hard worker, and that's it. So this calls into particular emphasis that we need to have criteria within the RFP that are objective, because we can't have decisions being made on these types of subjective ideas. Thank you.
Thank you.
I should say I did do some homework, and I did know that Chris was very capable of cutting trees, and I don't believe that he would have put a bid in if he wasn't capable of doing the trees. So thank you very much. I'm gonna stop.
Mark, then Greg.
So I wanted to speak to this point about whether an arborist is required to do this work. And when Junior and I and the rest of the EAB preparedness plan team were talking about this, we did talk about the desirability of recruiting somebody, a contractor, who would be interested in the firewood, because we thought that might reduce the cost of the contract if the contractor was using the firewood, to sell that. And so, for that reason, I did welcome Chris's participation in the bidding process, and I expect him to do a good job. I went down and I looked at the work he's done so far, and I find no fault with it. A couple little things we'll talk about, but no real fault. And given the choice between the two contractors, why not go with a contractor who said he can do it in half the time, who has greater level of expertise, who I have more confidence in will take care of the regeneration, because we're depending on natural regeneration, to repopulate our roads after the ash trees are removed. So that's one thing. And then the tree marking, Carrie, this was brought up. So Greg Smith, when we went out, we did a site visit for the interested contractors. Greg Smith showed up with his son. They were very adamant that we needed to mark the trees, and they volunteered to help us with that. Subsequently, Chris also volunteered. I welcomed their help with that. I assumed that they understood that this wasn't going to tilt things in their favor, but was just a gesture of, from two people who are very involved in work in the town and wanted to make a contribution. So I think that was an okay thing to do.
So Mark, I'm curious, why did you not plan on planting any more trees back?
It's just Carrie's expensive. Planting trees can be, putting a good-sized tree in the ground is like $150, $300. And the town just doesn't have enough money to do that. Most of the trees in the town are sort of naturally volunteered from seedlings and or seeds and whatnot. So that's our main plan, is to work with natural regeneration. So therefore, we had part of the RFP was that we wanted a contractor. The contractor has to take care, to the extent possible, of the regeneration. I thought teachers would likely do a better job with that, but that was my feeling.
My recollection to that idea also was in the first Emerald Ash Borer Preparedness Committee's meeting. Professor Bergdahl brought up the idea of having this be an opportunity to release space for native trees to come up. So that was kind of in the wheelhouse of thinking that this is could be an opportunity to allow native roadside trees a chance where ash trees had been taking most of the sun. Anyone who hasn't spoken? Oh, Greg, I think I called you next.
Just a couple things is I don't want the town to go through any legal mumbo jumbo, so I'll withdraw my bid, and Chris can take care of this contract. I mean, this process is what's most important to me, and in the future, I do think it's really important that a tree care company are the only ones considered. I've bid on 11 government contracts this winter, and none of them have considered any company that isn't a full-blown tree care company because of our insurance and training and safety. And there are trees that he's coming up on that can't be cut down without wrecking other trees unless you climb the tree or have a bucket truck. So he hasn't got to that part yet, but because that's part of the reason we could get half the time is because my crew is, they all are formally trained. So anyway, I just want to say that, and then I just got an RFP from the state for Mount Philo, and it says cost, experience, and time to completion. Those are the only criteria. This doesn't have to be complicated. And then they only take bids from tree companies. And I got half the bids that I bid on this winter, and I had no problem with any of the ones I didn't get. Because I can look at the list and say, oh, those guys will do a good job. I know those guys, And I kind of take offense at your reasoning for why you awarded this contract, that it's the guy it's not a local small business, because I'm a local small business, and that's not in the RFP. All the reasons you gave are not in the RFP. The firewood's not in the RFP, what to do with the wood isn't in the RFP, none of that. And so, or are you going to take care of little trees or do extra work along the way, or, so you need to just have it in the RFP and then follow the RFP. And then if you don't, you better have a good reason, or we'll have another meeting.
Thank you. Bill? And then Bill?
Hi, Bill Fraser Harris, and most of you, or a lot of you know me. I try to promote a lot of fun in town, and tonight's not a lot of fun. But unfortunately, as Bill Fraser Harris, I may well have initiated some of this because I may well have been I was at the meeting on the 22nd, and I may have been the first letter to the Select Board with my concerns. And I was concerned as a resident of town, not as chairperson of Recreation. And what I just want to highlight here is, I think, process now, and I want to thank Greg for his presentation and mentioning me. Process will change. What concerns me a little bit over the last week is a Select Board member has asked me to present all of my dealings and documentation of my dealings with Teachers Tree Service. A Select Board member has asked for all minutes from Recreation for the last year.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I did say at the beginning of the meeting that I was asking everyone to be germane to the Select Board agenda item of public input and discussion. This is germane to this bidding process?
I believe so.
I don't think we should go there because other things are going to come up that aren't part of the.
I'll finish my comment.
If you can make it germane, please feel free to. I was not seeing where that was.
I would
simply
ask you to, from my own personal perspective, to distinguish between the Bill Fraser Harris as a Charlotte resident and the Bill Fraser Harris of Charlotte Recreation, who I hope is and know is committed to this town and this community and moving forward in a positive direction. So, thank you.
Thank you. Bill Stuna.
Thank you. First of all, Greg, I want to follow up on a comment you just made because I think it's really important. First of all, Carrie, thank you for explaining that you don't have any personal relationships. It's an important thing. And don't shake your head. I mean, this is an important issue.
It is.
But I really take obsession that one of your criteria for decision making is that the person who accepted the bid is a lifetime resident. You say he raised the family here. So is being a longtime resident a criteria for participating in the bid process or getting an award or getting appointed to a board? Just because people may not have lived here, Greg certainly is a resident here and has been here a while, but maybe not as long as Chris. So is tenure in Charlotte one of your criteria? And then you also mentioned that you're generally aware that he does a good work and has strong work ethics. Well, you don't disclose how you're generally aware of that. Are you aware of Greg's work? These are important issues. And this is my copy of the Select Board Handbook. I assume you all have your own copy. I hope so. You should know it inside and out. And I'd like to read one quote. Oftentimes, the appearance of a conflict of interest can be more damaging than the conflict itself. And that's part of what's going on here. Whether or not you have a conflict or not, we don't know, but there could be an appearance of one on how this process has played out. So these are all important issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Yes, just behind the camera.
Yeah, my name's George Thompson, and I'd just like to ask one question. Do you guys have the bids before the meeting to look at the prices or not? Or are they open right here at the meeting that night?
So the process is in the bid policy and what we followed. April 8th meeting, the bids were received. That was the submission deadline. They were opened at a public meeting as part of the fairness, the public process to be fair. And then they were submitted to the administrator to compile them in a spreadsheet so that we could compare them over a 2-week period to see the differences. And then the contract was awarded at the next select board meeting 2 weeks later, and discussed at both meetings.
And I live just off of Lake Road, and I honestly think you guys are making an awful mistake on cutting those trees down prematurely. I think you should wait till the bugs get here. They're not going to, if they designate the whole, or destroy all the trees in 1 year, you're going to hire somebody with a bucket to get up there to cut the trees down anyways, and it'd be safer. And, you know, I'm just saying, leave the trees stand until the bugs get here. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. Peter?
No.
Yeah?
Next time I won't squander my time like with some nitpicking. I'm Peter Richardson. I'm heartened by this conversation. I almost didn't come tonight because there's enough strife and turmoil in the world without having it be this close to home. But you know, Matt and the board has acknowledged that there are issues there are in this process, and you're committed to address them and figure them out. The articulation that amongst the folks who showed up tonight is impressive. There's issues that have been underscored that you got to put more into these RFPs so everybody knows what's the scope that's being sought, what the requirements are for making proposals, what the evaluation criteria and selection and process will be after the fact. You pull those things together, we won't need to have this again. I appreciate it. I'm hungry, I'm gonna go home and eat.
What's for dinner? Yeah.
I guess one more.
Thank you. I wasn't going to speak, but I live a block from where this is going on. And Mr. Thompson, who just spoke, is my neighbor. And a mini version of this project was done on our immediate street by Junior Lewis last year. So I feel as if I know what it looks like before, during, and after. I also know that the safety consideration of a tree falling on you doesn't wash, because we have dead elms all over the town, and the town isn't worrying about cutting them down. There are dead elms on the town right-of-way all over the town. They're there. So now we're going to cut down. I urge everyone to go out and take a look at all the trees with green slashes on them. We're going to cut down 50 or 60 healthy trees. The bug isn't here yet. It's in Montpelier. It will get here, and those trees will die. And the big ash on my driveway, which is on town property, will have to be cut down. But I believe in this instance we have two problems. One is I think we need a licensed arborist to do this work, because these are two of the prettiest stretches of tree canopy dirt roads in our town. The canopy of trees, okay, they're ash trees, they're going to die. On that stretch of Lake Road is truly magnificent. And you know I'm that crazy runner. I see it every day. I run that corridor every single day. So I, as a citizen, want a licensed arborist to do this job because it will look more aesthetic. We all care about what Vermont looks like. This is a beautiful place. We don't live here because it's ugly. And that's my sense when I look at the 50 or 60 trees that we're going to lose. I'm crushed. I'm heartbroken. They're not dead yet. But we're going to cut them down. Now we have somebody here who says we have to cut them down. I don't believe it, but we do. I'd like it to be done with aesthetics in mind as well as public safety. And my personal opinion is that Teachers Tree Service, as a licensed arborist, is going to give me the completed picture that I want to see on my street 4/10 of a mile from my front door. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there a better time of year to cut trees such as this for birds' nests? Birds living in the pileated woodpecker?
We're staying focused on the public input discussion
Thank you.
and improving the
But I
bidding
was-
process. Junior.
I'd just like to say one thing, you know, to Carly there, that we, the Lewis Excavating, have been out for the last month and a half or so cutting dead elm trees.
You got dead ones.
I'm saying the dead elms, but you said that we weren't, that we're worried about the live trees and we're not cutting dead ones. We've been cutting dead trees.
No, I know.
Okay.
And I know
Well, I just
you
wanna
did a
make
great
sure-
job on the dead ones.
Yeah, I
the
just-
ash trees.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that you're not saying that we're not cutting dead trees.
Well, it's not with the, we haven't cut the elms with the urgency that we're cutting these live ash trees.
Just on the.
Sorry, I'm off point.
No, and a factual response to that, in some of the discussions in the committee that was put together with people with really a breadth and depth of tree knowledge, UVM professors, I mean, just a really amazing committee of knowledgeable people, including the state, which is supportive of the preparedness plans for emerald ash borer. Some of the considerations that did come up is the ash tree specifically, when it dies, is a relatively dangerous tree. It is very top heavy and from the discussions disintegrates more easily as it's just not a very stable structured tree. I just know from my experience growing up here that ash is one of the trees that you can put in the, get good heating value out of even when it's green. It's not a structurally strong tree, especially compared to the elm, which will stay standing as a stag for quite a while. So that was a consideration of why do it now versus wait.
No, I recognize this is a fait accompli, you're gonna cut all those trees down. I would just like it to look handsome and pretty when it's done, not like a war.
And that is received to heart. I do understand that piece of it. I think Burlington went through a very similar painful process with the elms and the incredible canopy in the early 80s.
I was here, I know.
Is there more input? So I guess I would like to thank everyone for coming and for maintaining a really healthy community discussion. I have to say I was coming into this meeting with some apprehension based on some of the black and white discussions in Front Porch Forum, and I really appreciate everyone recognizing the important community building process here. And I know that the board is committed to picking this up quickly and not having a similar RFP process moving forward. If you're going to be looking at select board agendas in the future, my plan is to create a consistent recognition. So the select board agenda item will read improving the bidding process, and that will reference the work that we started here tonight moving forward. So if people see that, I hope we continue to get public input as we improve the process. For the 7 o'clock contractual obligation of the town, does the board want to review the legal opinion? It seems to me that it's a non-issue at this point, given the comments. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Say aye. Opposed? Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.